I recognize that call sign. Shadowhawk? Lucio?
Shadowhawk? I never thought I'd hear that name again. Yes, that's me.
What's your call sign? The fighter pilot demanded over the radio. The quiet woman in row 8, the one nobody noticed boarding, was now in the cockpit. Both engines had failed at 28,000 feet. And suddenly, this ordinary passenger became their only hope. Her answer would shock everyone, Shadowhawk. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a perfect day for flying. That's what Captain Marcus Webb thought as he walked across the tarmac at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport that Thursday morning. The sky was crystal clear blue. Not a single cloud anywhere. Light wind, maybe 5 knots from the west. Temperature 72 degrees, visibility unlimited. Every single condition was exactly what a pilot dreams of. Marcus was 56 years old. He had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years. He had logged over 17,000 hours in the cockpit. He had flown this exact route, Phoenix to Seattle, hundreds of times. Maybe thousands. He knew every mountain, every valley, every landmark along the way. He could probably fly it with his eyes closed. Today was just another Thursday morning. Another routine flight, nothing special at all. Southwest Flight 1847 was scheduled to depart at 7:42 a.m. It was a Boeing 737-800. The plane was 9 years old but in excellent condition. It had just come out of a C-check, the most comprehensive maintenance inspection. Every system had been tested. Every component examined. Everything worked perfectly. The engines ran smooth during the ground test. Beautiful. Marcus climbed the stairs to the cockpit. His first officer was already there, running through the pre-flight checklist with careful precision. "Morning, Captain," said First Officer David Park. David was 38 years old. Former Navy pilot who had flown F/A-18 Hornets off aircraft carriers before transitioning to commercial aviation. He had 8,500 hours of flight time. Smart, careful, professional, detail-oriented. Marcus enjoyed working with him. They had a good rhythm together. "Morning, David. How's everything looking this morning?" "All good, Captain. Weather is absolutely perfect. Flight plan is filed and accepted. We've got 183 passengers boarding right now. Completely full flight. Fuel load is optimal. No maintenance issues. No delays. Everything is running like clockwork." Marcus settled into his seat and began his own checks. Fuel levels good, enough for the flight plus reserves. Hydraulics good, all 3 systems showing normal pressure, electrical systems good, generators online. Navigation systems good, GPS locked, flight management system programmed. Everything was exactly as it should be. Behind them, in the cabin, flight attendants were helping passengers find their seats and stow their luggage in the overhead bins. The usual controlled chaos of boarding. In the boarding line, a woman walked down the aisle carrying a small backpack. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She was 44 years old. Elena was wearing faded blue jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a worn brown leather jacket that looked like it had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup. No jewelry except for a small silver pin on her jacket collar. The pin showed the silhouette of an A-10 Warthog aircraft, a distinctive military plane. Most people wouldn't recognize it. Only military pilots would know what it meant. Elena found her seat, 8A. Window seat, economy class, nothing fancy. She sat down quietly. She put her small backpack under the seat in front of her. Then she pulled out a notebook and a book from the backpack. The businessman sitting next to her in 8B didn't even look up from his laptop. He was typing emails furiously, probably working on some important business deal. The teenager in 8C had headphones on, already watching a movie on his phone, completely absorbed in his own world. Nobody noticed Elena. She was just another passenger. Quiet. Unremarkable, invisible. But David Park noticed her. During the final boarding check, David walked through the cabin. It was standard procedure before every flight. He liked to see the passengers, make sure everything was orderly, check that luggage was properly stowed, scan for anything unusual. When he passed row 8, he glanced at the woman in the window seat. Something about her caught his attention. He wasn't sure what exactly. The way she moved, quick, efficient, alert, purposeful. The way her eyes had tracked the emergency exits when she first sat down, mentally mapping the cabin. The slight tension in her shoulders, like someone who had spent years sitting in military ejection seats and never fully learned to relax in civilian aircraft. And then David saw the book she was reading. Emergency Procedures for Asymmetric Flight, Military Applications. David blinked. That wasn't a normal book. That wasn't something civilians read for entertainment. That was advanced pilot training material. Military stuff. Technical, specialized. He made a mental note but said nothing. Maybe she worked in aviation. Maybe she was a flight instructor. Maybe she was just an aviation enthusiast who liked reading technical manuals. No big deal. He had absolutely no idea that in exactly 34 minutes, this quiet woman would become the only reason that he and 182 other people would survive the day. David returned to the cockpit. "We're ready, Captain." All passengers seated. Doors closing now. Marcus keyed the radio. "Ground, Southwest 1847, ready for pushback, Gate B14. Southwest 1847, cleared to push. Contact ground on 121.7 when ready to taxi." The pushback tug moved the aircraft away from the gate. The engine started smoothly, a beautiful sound that Marcus had heard 10,000 times but still loved. That deep, powerful roar of jet engines coming to life. They taxied to runway 25 left. Tower cleared them for takeoff. Southwest 1847, winds 270 at 5, runway 25 left, cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff, 25 left, Southwest 1847. Marcus advanced the throttles smoothly. The engines roared louder. The 737 accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, and then lifted smoothly into the perfect Arizona sky at exactly 7:42 a.m. "Positive rate," David called out, monitoring the instruments. "Gear up," Marcus confirmed. The landing gear retracted with a solid thunk. 1,000 feet. 2,000 feet. 3,000 feet. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect, textbook takeoff. In row 8, Elena Vasquez looked out the window as Phoenix dropped away below them. She saw the sprawling city spread out across the desert valley. Then the city gave way to desert. Then mountains appeared on the northern horizon, the beginnings of the great mountain ranges that stretched all the way to Canada. She sat quietly for the first 20 minutes. Just another passenger. Nobody noticed her. The businessman next to her was typing emails. The teenager was watching a movie. Nobody knew who Elena really was. Nobody knew what she had done. Nobody knew that the quiet woman in row 8 was one of the most decorated combat pilots in modern military history. Southwest 1847 climbed steadily through the morning sky. 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet. The aircraft was performing beautifully. "Flight attendants, you're free to move about the cabin," Marcus announced over the intercom once they reached 10,000 feet. The seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. Passengers unbuckled. Some stood to stretch. Flight attendants began preparing the beverage service, rolling carts down the aisles. 20,000 feet. 25,000 feet. "Level at flight level 280, David said. That meant 28,000 feet, 5.3 miles above sea level. Marcus engaged the autopilot. The sophisticated computer system would fly the aircraft now, following the programmed route north toward Oregon and Washington, maintaining altitude and speed precisely. Cruise checklist complete, David confirmed. Marcus leaned back in his seat. Good. 3 hours to Seattle. Easy day, perfect weather. Can't ask for better conditions than this. They settled into the comfortable routine of a long cruise flight. Marcus drank coffee from his thermos. David checked weather reports ahead, all clear, no issues. The aircraft hummed along smoothly at 28,000 feet, covering ground at 450 miles per hour. Below them, Nevada passed by slowly. Desert, mountains, small towns scattered across the vast landscape like tiny clusters of lights. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with their beverage cart. Coffee, orange juice, water, soda. When they reached row 8, Elena asked for water. She said thank you quietly, politely. The flight attendant smiled and moved on. Elena went back to looking out the window. They were flying north now. The landscape was changing gradually. Less desert. More mountains, more forests. This was Oregon, rugged, beautiful, wild country. And that's when Elena saw something that made her stomach tighten. A faint haze in the air, very faint, almost invisible. Most people wouldn't notice it at all. Most pilots wouldn't notice it from the cockpit. But Elena's eyes were trained differently. She had spent 18 years flying A-10 Warthog attack aircraft in combat zones. Low-altitude missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Flying through dust storms, sandstorms, smoke from burning oil fields, haze from battle damage. Her eyes had learned to see atmospheric conditions that other pilots missed. This haze looked familiar. It reminded her of something she'd seen before in Afghanistan. Volcanic ash. Elena's pulse quickened slightly. She pulled out her phone. She opened a weather app. She searched for recent volcanic activity in the Pacific Northwest. Mount Hood, minor eruption 36 hours ago. Small ash plume reported. Weather services said it had dissipated and was no longer a threat to aviation. But Elena knew better. Volcanic ash doesn't really dissipate the way weather services think it does. It settles. It drifts. And at certain altitudes, it can hang in the air for days, invisible to weather radar but absolutely deadly to jet engines. She had read reports about this. British Airways Flight 9 over Indonesia in 1982, flew into volcanic ash, all 4 engines failed, nearly crashed. KLM Flight 867 over Alaska in 1989, same thing. Volcanic ash is one of the most dangerous threats to aviation because it's nearly invisible until it's too late. She looked at the flight path displayed on the screen in the seat in front of her. The moving map showed their current position and route. They were flying directly toward the area where the ash cloud would be drifting. Elena's jaw tightened. Her military training was screaming warnings at her. She pulled out her notebook. Opened it on her tray table, started making calculations rapidly. Glide ratios. Descent rates. Wind vectors. Distance to nearest airports. Emergency descent profiles. Energy management equations. The businessman next to her glanced over, saw the complex mathematics and technical diagrams, looked confused, then went back to his emails. Then she looked out the window again at the faint haze that was getting slightly thicker. For a moment, she considered doing nothing. It probably wasn't dangerous. The weather services had given the all clear. The pilots surely knew what they were doing. They had sophisticated equipment in the cockpit. They would see any hazard. But something in her gut, instinct learned from 127 combat missions where hesitation could mean death, said this was wrong. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. The businessman looked at her. Restroom? Elena didn't answer. She was looking toward the front of the cabin, thinking, calculating. Should she say something? To whom? A flight attendant? What would she say? I think we're flying into volcanic ash. They'd think she was crazy. They'd tell her to sit down and relax. Should she try to get a message to the pilots? How? You can't just walk up to a cockpit door anymore. Not since 9/11. It's locked. Secured. She sat back down. Buckled in, tried to relax. But she kept the notebook open. Kept watching the instruments she could see from her seat, the speed display on the seatback screen, the altitude, the route map. Kept watching out the window as the haze grew slightly thicker. Her hands were tense. Her breathing was controlled. She was preparing mentally, the way she used to before combat missions. Something bad was about to happen. She could feel it. And then, at exactly 28,000 feet, exactly 34 minutes after takeoff, everything changed in an instant. In the cockpit, Marcus and David were discussing dinner plans in Seattle that evening. There's this great seafood place near Pike Place Market, David was saying. Right on the waterfront. Best salmon you've ever tasted. They get it fresh every morning from the fishing boats. I'm telling you, it's incredible. He stopped mid-sentence. Captain, engine 1 temperature just spiked. Marcus glanced at the engine display panel. How much? Just a degree or 2. Maybe 3. Probably nothing, could be a sensor glitch. 10 seconds later, the temperature spiked again. Fast. Really fast. Abnormally fast. Engine 1 overheat warning. David said, his voice louder now, more urgent. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the throttle. What the hell? Then engine 1 coughed. The whole aircraft shuddered slightly, a vibration they could feel through the control yoke. The engine coughed again, louder this time. And then it quit. Just stopped. Complete silence from the left side of the aircraft. Engine 1 flame out. Marcus shouted. Shutdown checklist, now. David was already moving, his hands flying across the controls, flipping switches, running the emergency procedure from memory, something he had practiced hundreds of times in simulators but never once in real life. Fuel cutoff for engine 1. Fire suppression system armed. Secure the engine. Isolate the systems. One engine out wasn't good, but it wasn't a disaster. A 737 can fly perfectly well on one engine. They'd divert to the nearest suitable airport, land safely, passengers would be delayed but fine. This was a serious situation but manageable. Marcus was already planning. David, get me the nearest. But then engine 2 started doing the same thing. Temperature spiking rapidly, vibration increasing, strange sounds from the right side, power dropping. No, 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 Marcus said, his voice tight. Engine 2 is failing. Dual engine failure. David shouted. Both engines quit within 5 seconds of each other. The cockpit went eerily, terrifyingly quiet. No engine roar. Just the whistle of wind over the fuselage and the quiet beeping of multiple alarm systems. They were gliding. A 737 with 183 people on board, gliding like a giant paper airplane at 28,000 feet over the Oregon mountains. Marcus grabbed the radio, forcing his voice to stay calm and professional. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Southwest 1847, dual engine flameout at flight level 280. Both engines dead. 183 souls on board. We are gliding. The air traffic controller's voice came back immediately, shocked and disbelieving. Southwest 1847, Seattle Center, confirm both engines failed? Affirmative. We have ingested volcanic ash. Both engines are choked. They will not restart. We are gliding. Request immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport. Southwest 1847, understand dual engine failure, nearest suitable airport is Portland International, bearing 315 degrees, distance 67 nautical miles. Descend and maintain best glide speed. David was frantically running the engine restart procedure, his fingers moving quickly across the controls. Rotating engine 1, negative, no ignition. Rotating engine 2, negative. No ignition on either engine. They're completely choked with ash. Captain, they're not coming back. We have no engines. Marcus forced himself to think clearly. He had trained for this scenario. Every commercial pilot trains for dual-engine failure. But it almost never happens in real life. Almost never. He looked at the navigation display with cold, calculating eyes. Current altitude, 28,000 feet. That equals 5.3 miles above ground level. A 737's glide ratio is approximately 17:1. That means for every mile of altitude, they can glide about 17 miles forward horizontally. Quick math, 5.3 miles times 17 equals roughly 90 miles maximum glide range in perfect conditions. But that was book numbers. Theoretical performance. In reality, they would lose energy maneuvering, compensating for wind, configuring the aircraft for landing. Real-world glide range would be less. Maybe 80 miles, maybe 75. Marcus looked at the map. Nearest suitable airport, Portland International. Distance, 67 nautical miles northwest. That's about 77 statute miles. He pulled up the glide range calculator on the flight management computer. Current altitude, 28,000 feet. Glide ratio, 17:1 maximum theoretical range, 90 miles. The calculator ran the numbers with current wind, weight, and conditions. Glide range, 58 miles distance to Portland, 67 miles shortfall, 9 miles. The math was brutal. Unforgiving. They would fall 9 miles short of the runway. 9 miles of forest and mountains between them and safety. David, run the numbers. Confirm glide range to Portland. David's fingers flew across the flight management computer. His face went pale as he read the display. Captain, the calculator shows we'll fall exactly 9 miles short. We'll crash in the forest before we reach the runway. Marcus felt ice spreading through his chest. They were going to die. 183 people, going to crash into the Oregon wilderness. No survivors. Unless they found another option. First Officer David Park was running through the emergency checklist mechanically, his hands shaking slightly, when something clicked in his mind. The woman in 8A. Reading the military flight manual during boarding. He didn't know why he thought of her at that exact moment. Maybe desperation, maybe divine intervention, maybe just instinct. But something told him she was important. Something told him she might be able to help. He unbuckled his shoulder harness and stood up abruptly. David, what are you doing? Marcus said sharply. We're in the middle of an emergency. Captain, trust me. 30 seconds. I need to check something. Check what? We need to. Trust me. David opened the cockpit door and stepped into the cabin. It was chaos. Passengers were crying, praying, calling loved ones on their phones. Children were screaming. Flight attendants were trying to maintain calm, but their faces showed barely controlled fear. The aircraft was angled slightly nose down. The gliding descent was smooth, but everyone could feel that something was terribly wrong. David walked quickly down the aisle to row 8. Elena Vasquez was sitting calmly. She had her notebook open on her tray table. She was writing calculations rapidly, glide ratios, descent rates, wind vectors, energy management equations. Her face was focused, calm, professional. David stopped at her row. Ma'am. Elena looked up at him with clear, steady eyes. You were reading a military flight manual during boarding, David said urgently. I saw it. Emergency procedures for asymmetric flight. Yes. Are you a pilot? I was. Military? Air Force, retired. David made a decision that broke every regulation in the book. Come with me. Right now. We need you in the cockpit. Elena stood immediately. No questions. No hesitation. She grabbed her notebook and followed him. The businessman in 8B looked confused. What's going on? The teenager didn't even notice. David led Elena to the cockpit door. He knocked, the special code knock that signals crew. The door unlocked. They stepped inside. Marcus turned, saw a civilian woman entering his cockpit during an emergency, and his face went red with anger. Get her out of here. David, what the hell are you thinking? We don't have time for. Captain, she's a pilot. David said forcefully. Military pilot, Air Force. She was reading advanced emergency procedures. Just listen to her. I don't care what she was reading. This is my cockpit during an emergency and I don't need some civilian passenger. She can help us. David shouted. We're going to crash in 5 minutes unless something changes. Just listen to what she has to say. Marcus stopped. He stared at Elena. She stood calmly, notebook in hand, meeting his eyes without fear or uncertainty. Who are you? Marcus demanded. Elena's voice was steady, calm, professional. Military bearing. Captain Elena Vasquez. United States Air Force, retired. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What airline did you fly for before the Air Force? No airline, sir. I went straight into military service after college. Then what did you fly? A-10 Thunderbolt 2. Warthogs. Close air support. Call sign Shadowhawk. Marcus blinked. A-10S, the tank killers. Yes, sir. Low altitude close air support. Ground attack. I flew 127 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. What the hell does that have to do with flying a commercial? In combat, engines get hit, Elena interrupted calmly. A lot, ground fire, missiles, mechanical failures from battle damage. I've landed crippled aircraft on improvised runways in the desert while people were shooting at me. I've made dead stick landings, no engines, no power. I know how to glide when nothing works. I know how to fly when the aircraft is dying. Marcus's pride was screaming at him. He had 31 years of experience. He didn't need help from a passenger. This was his aircraft, his emergency, his responsibility as captain. But his survival instinct was louder. They had maybe 5 minutes before hitting the ground. Maybe less. What's your assessment? He asked curtly. Elena stepped closer and looked at the instrument panel. Her eyes moved quickly, efficiently, taking in altitude, airspeed, descent rate, distance to Portland, wind conditions. Reading the instruments like she had done it 10,000 times before. You're not going to make Portland, she said flatly. Your glide calculator is correct. You'll fall exactly 9 miles short. You'll crash in the forest well before reaching the runway. I know that. Marcus said, frustration and fear bleeding into his voice. That's why we're trying to. But there's another option. A better option. Elena pointed to the navigation screen. There. Cascade Locks, Oregon. Abandoned military airstrip, built in the 1950s for emergency B-52 bomber landings during the Cold War. Runway is 7,200 feet long. It's been abandoned for 30 years but the concrete is still there. It's 67 nautical miles at your 10 o'clock position. Marcus stared at her. That's even farther than Portland. We can't possibly. You can if you use the terrain correctly. Elena tapped the map, showing the mountain ridgeline. See this mountain range? The Cascade Mountains. The wind is hitting it from the west at approximately 35 knots. When wind hits a mountain face, it deflects upward. That creates mountain wave lift, columns of rising air along the entire ridgeline. If we fly along that ridgeline at the correct altitude and airspeed, we can ride that rising air like a glider. It will reduce our descent rate significantly. It'll extend your glide range by 12 to 15 miles. Maybe more if we do it perfectly. Marcus looked at David. David looked shocked. I've never heard of commercial pilots doing that, Marcus said. That's because commercial pilots always have engines, Elena replied calmly. You don't train for extended powerless flight. But military pilots do. Especially A-10 pilots. The Warthog is built to take damage and keep flying. I've done this exact technique multiple times in combat situations. I've glided crippled A-10s to emergency landing strips using terrain-induced lift. I can do it in a 737. You're asking me to trust you, a complete stranger, with 183 lives. Elena met his eyes steadily. No, sir. I'm telling you that I'm the only person on this aircraft who has successfully landed a powerless aircraft under worse conditions than this. I've done it in combat. Under fire, with people trying to kill me. This is the same physics. Same principles, just a heavier aircraft. It's your choice, Captain. But you need to decide now. We're losing altitude every second. Time is running out. Marcus looked at the instruments. 26,000 feet, descending at 1,200 feet per minute. Less than 20 minutes until impact with the ground. He looked at Elena Vasquez, this quiet woman in jeans and a t-shirt who claimed she could save them all using techniques he'd never heard of. But something in her eyes told him she was telling the truth. Something in her bearing, calm, professional, confident without arrogance, told him she knew exactly what she was doing. Marcus made his decision. Okay. Tell me exactly what to do. Every detail. Don't leave anything out. Elena nodded. First, I need to sit down. David, can I use the jump seat? Yes, absolutely. Elena moved to the jump seat, the small fold-down seat behind the two pilots used by check pilots or FAA inspectors during evaluation flights. She buckled the 4-point harness. Okay, she said, opening her notebook. Let's save this aircraft. While this was happening in the cockpit of Southwest 1847, something else was happening in the sky around them. Two F-15 Eagle fighter jets from the Oregon Air National Guard had scrambled from Portland Air National Guard Base. Their mission, monitor the emergency, provide visual confirmation of the aircraft's status, relay information to ground controllers, and, if necessary, observe the crash site for search and rescue coordination. The lead pilot was Colonel Jake Martinez. Call sign, Reaper. Age 52. Combat veteran with 3 tours in the Middle East. 25 years flying fighters. One of the most experienced pilots in the Air National Guard. Reaper and his wingman, Captain Sarah Viper Chen, were approaching Southwest 1847's position at high speed when they heard the radio transmissions. Southwest 1847, this is Portland Center. What is your current status and plan? Marcus's voice came through, tense but controlled. Portland Center, we are attempting to reach Cascade Lock's abandoned airstrip. We have received assistance from a retired military pilot who is currently in the cockpit providing tactical guidance for powerless flight procedures. The air traffic controller sounded confused. Southwest 1847, say again. You have military assistance aboard your aircraft? Then a different voice came over the radio. Female, calm, professional, using precise military terminology. Portland Center, this is Captain Elena Vasquez speaking from the cockpit of Southwest 1847. I am providing technical assistance to the flight crew based on combat experience with powerless aircraft landings and emergency gliding procedures. We are executing a mountain wave glide technique to extend our range to Cascade Lock's airstrip. Reaper's head snapped up. His hands tightened on the flight controls. He knew that voice. It couldn't be. He keyed his radio mic. Southwest 1847, this is Reaper Lead, Oregon Air National Guard, intercepting for visual confirmation. Identify the person providing flight instruction in your cockpit. State full name, rank, and call sign. There was a brief pause. Then, Reaper, this is Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Air Force, retired. Former A-10 pilot. Call sign Shadowhawk. Reaper's breath caught in his throat. His wingman's voice crackled over the squadron frequency. Boss, did she just say Shadowhawk? Confirm your call sign, Reaper transmitted, his voice urgent. You stated Shadowhawk. Affirmative, Reaper. Shadowhawk. Hotel Alpha Whiskey Kilo. The military radio frequency absolutely exploded with chatter. Multiple fighter pilots who were monitoring the emergency frequency started transmitting almost simultaneously. Shadowhawk. The legendary A-10 pilot. Holy shit, I thought she was discharged years ago. That's the pilot who dead-sticked an A-10 in Fallujah after both engines were completely destroyed by RPG fire. Then Reaper's voice cut through, urgent and direct. Southwest 1847, did she say Shadowhawk? Ma'am, what's your call sign? Confirm you are Captain Elena Vasquez. Elena keyed the radio. Affirmative, call sign Shadowhawk. Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Air Force, retired. Confirm. More voices on the frequency. That's the woman who saved an entire Marine platoon in Afghanistan. She earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. The first female A-10 pilot to complete a dead-stick landing in a combat zone. Reaper cut through the radio chatter with command authority. All stations, clear this frequency immediately. Shadowhawk, this is Reaper. Confirm identity, are you Elena Vasquez who flew with the 74th Fighter Squadron in Iraq during Operation Phantom Fury in 2004? Affirmative, Reaper. That's me. Shadowhawk, I flew with you in Ramadi. You covered my ground team when they were pinned down by insurgent fire. I watched you make 3 gun runs with your left engine on fire and hydraulics failing. You saved my team's lives that day. A slight pause. Then Elena's voice, quieter, I remember, Reaper. Good to hear your voice again. If you say you can glide that 737 to Cascade Locks using mountain wave lift, I believe you absolutely. You're the best stick and rudder pilot I've ever flown with. Southwest 1847, this is Reaper advising, let Captain Vasquez handle this emergency. She knows what she's doing. In the cockpit, Marcus looked at Elena with new eyes. This quiet woman in jeans and a t-shirt had just been endorsed by F-15 fighter pilots who had flown combat missions with her. Captain Vasquez, Marcus said formally, his tone completely changed. Please tell us exactly what to do. We're trusting you completely. Elena nodded. Thank you, Captain. Let's bring everyone home safely. Elena settled into the jump seat and opened her notebook to a page filled with calculations and diagrams. Okay, first things first. Current altitude, she asked. 24,800 feet, David reported, watching the altimeter. Descending at 1,300 feet per minute. Airspeed? 220 knots indicated. That's too fast. You're wasting energy. Reduce to 200 knots. Best glide speed for a 737 at this weight is approximately 200 knots. Any faster and you're just creating drag. Any slower and you lose lift efficiency. Marcus carefully adjusted the nose attitude. Since there were no throttles to adjust with both engines dead, he controlled airspeed by raising or lowering the nose. He brought the nose up slightly, bleeding off speed. Airspeed 210. 205, 200 knots, David confirmed. Perfect. Hold that precisely. Now turn heading 295 degrees. Marcus banked the aircraft smoothly to the left. Through the windscreen, the Cascade Mountain Range came into view, a magnificent wall of peaks stretching from north to south. See that ridgeline? Elena pointed through the windscreen. The primary ridge running north-south. The prevailing winds are from the west at approximately 35 knots. When that wind mass hits the western face of the mountain range, it has nowhere to go but up. It deflects vertically. That creates a standing wave of rising air along the entire ridgeline, sometimes extending 20 or 30 miles downwind of the peaks. I've heard about mountain waves, David said. Glider pilots use them. Exactly. Glider pilots can ride mountain waves to altitudes above 50,000 feet in some conditions. We're not trying to climb, we're just trying to reduce our sink rate. If we can position ourselves in the rising air, it'll partially offset our descent. Instead of sinking at 1,300 feet per minute, we might sink at only 400 or 500 feet per minute. That extends our range significantly. How close do we need to fly to the ridge? Marcus asked. About 500 feet above the peak altitude. Close enough to catch the strongest lift. Not so close that we risk hitting a mountain if we encounter turbulence. That's insane, Marcus muttered. Flying a disabled airliner 500 feet above mountain peaks. That's survival, Elena said calmly. In a TENS we sometimes flew 50 feet above the ground to avoid radar detection. This is actually quite conservative by comparison. Marcus flew the heading Elena had given him. Gradually, steadily, they approached the mountain range. The peaks looked menacing, sharp, rocky, unforgiving. Elena watched the instruments closely. Descent rate still 1,300 feet per minute. Affirmative, David confirmed, watching the vertical speed indicator. Wait for it. Wait for it. The aircraft crossed over the western edge of the ridgeline. And suddenly, magically, the descent rate changed. Descent rate decreasing. David called out, surprise and hope in his voice, 1,100 feet per minute. 900, 700. 600 feet per minute. The aircraft was still descending, but much more slowly. The invisible column of rising air from the mountain wave was partially supporting them, like an updraft under the wings of a bird. I'll be damned, Marcus whispered, staring at the instruments in disbelief. It's actually working. We're riding a wave of air we can't even see. Maintain this heading, Elena instructed calmly. Keep the ridgeline on our left side at a constant distance. Don't deviate. If we drift too far from the ridge, we lose the lift. If we get too close, we risk turbulence or terrain impact. For the next 10 minutes, they flew along the mountain range, riding the invisible wave of rising air. The F-15 Eagles flew alongside, slightly higher and offset, watching this incredible feat of airmanship. Reaper, are you seeing this? Captain Chen transmitted on the fighter frequency. Are you seeing what she's doing? I'm seeing it, Viper. She's extending their glide range way beyond the aircraft's book performance. I've never seen this technique used on a commercial jet. Elena's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. That's because commercial pilots don't train for extended powerless flight, Reaper. They assume engines will be available or at least one engine will keep running. In the A-10 community, we train for total systems failure constantly. When you fly low and slow over enemy territory with people actively trying to shoot you down, you learn to use every possible advantage, terrain masking, energy management, wind patterns. Today I'm just applying those same combat lessons to a civilian aircraft. Reaper shook his head in admiration as he watched the 737 gliding gracefully along the ridgeline. Shadowhawk, you always were the best pilot in the squadron. Watching you work is like watching an artist. In the 737's cockpit, Marcus was beginning to believe they might actually survive this nightmare. Distance to Cascade Locks, he asked. David checked the navigation display. 32 miles, current altitude 19,500 feet. Elena did rapid calculations in her notebook. We'll make it. We should cross the threshold at approximately 800 feet altitude with about 2 miles of energy to spare. That's cutting it close, but it's enough. What's our approach plan? Marcus asked. Straight-in approach. No maneuvering to spare. We can't afford to waste energy on turns. Gear down at 3,000 feet above ground level. Flaps incrementally as we descend. Don't deploy them all at once or we'll lose too much energy too quickly. Full flaps only when we're certain we'll reach the runway. That's very different from standard landing procedure. Standard procedure assumes you have engines available for a go-around if something goes wrong. We don't. We get exactly one attempt. One shot. If we come up short, there's no second chance. So we preserve every bit of energy until we're absolutely certain we can make the runway. Marcus nodded slowly. She was absolutely right. Understood. Point 1 approach. Point 1 landing. We make it count. At 14,000 feet, Cascade Locks airstrip came into view through the windscreen. It looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. A long, straight strip of concrete in the middle of a forest clearing. Weathered and cracked. Grass and small bushes growing through the joints in the pavement. The painted runway markings had faded to almost nothing, barely visible ghosts of numbers and lines. No lights. No navigational aids. No tower. No emergency services. It looked like it hadn't been used since the Cold War ended. That's your runway? Marcus said quietly. That's our runway, Elena confirmed. 7,200 feet of concrete, more than enough length for a 737 if we touch down in the first 1,000 feet. It looks like it's falling apart. Concrete doesn't fall apart easily. It cracks, it weathers, but it stays solid for decades. That runway will hold our weight. I guarantee it. David was running approach calculations. At our current descent rate and distance, we'll cross the runway threshold at approximately 600 feet altitude. That's lower than I'd like, Elena admitted. But it's workable. We just need to manage our energy perfectly. No mistakes. The F-15s broke formation and climbed to a higher altitude to give the 737 clear airspace. Southwest 1847, this is Reaper. We're clearing the area. The runway is all yours. We'll maintain overhead watch. Good luck, Shadowhawk. Bring them home safely. Thanks, Reaper. See you on the ground. 8,000 feet altitude. 7,000 feet. 6,000 feet. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen with every passing second. Marcus could see individual cracks now. Could see the grass growing through the pavement. Could see how truly abandoned this place was. Airspeed still 200 knots, David called out. Perfect. Maintain that until I tell you otherwise, Elena said. 5,000 feet altitude. 4,000 feet. They were committed now. No turning back. This was happening. Gear down, Elena commanded. Marcus reached for the landing gear lever and pulled it down. 3 solid thunks as the main wheels and nose wheel extended and locked into position. Immediately, drag increased dramatically. The descent rate increased. Descent rate 1,100 feet per minute, David reported. 3,000 feet altitude. 2,500 feet. Flaps 5 degrees, Elena instructed. David extended the flaps to the first setting. More drag. More lift. The aircraft's nose pitched down slightly to maintain airspeed. 2,000 feet. 1,500 feet. They could see everything now. The exact texture of the concrete, the cracks, the weeds, the surrounding forest that would kill them if they came up short. Flaps 15 degrees. Flaps 15, David confirmed, moving the flap lever. 1,200 feet altitude. 1,000 feet. Distance to threshold? Elena asked. 1 mile, David said, his voice tight with tension. Airspeed? 180 knots. Reduce to 160. Bleed off excess energy. Marcus raised the nose very slightly. The airspeed decreased. 170 knots. 165, 160. 800 feet altitude. 3/4 of a mile to the runway. Flaps 25 degrees. Flaps 25. 600 feet altitude, half a mile to the runway. They were going to make it. They were actually going to reach the runway. Full flaps. Now. Full flaps, David said, extending the flaps completely. The aircraft's descent rate increased dramatically. They were dropping faster now, but they had the runway made. They would definitely reach it. 400 feet altitude, 1/4 mile to the threshold. Airspeed 150 knots, David called. Perfect. Hold that until we're over the threshold, then bleed to 140. 300 feet. 200 feet. The runway filled the entire windscreen now. Cracked concrete, faded markings, their entire world. Marcus's hands were tight on the yoke. His entire body was tense. He had landed aircraft thousands of times in his career. But never like this. Never with no engines, never on an abandoned runway in the wilderness, never with 183 lives depending on absolute perfection. 100 feet. Airspeed 145 knots, David called. Threshold in 5 seconds, Elena said calmly. Get ready to flare. Not too early or we'll balloon and stall. Not too late or we'll smash the gear. 50 feet. Steady. Elena said quietly. 30 feet. 20 feet. Now. Flare. Gently. Marcus pulled back smoothly on the yoke. The nose lifted. The descent slowed. The main wheels kissed the concrete, firm but controlled, exactly 950 feet past the start of the runway. Spoilers full. Marcus shouted. David slammed the spoiler lever up. The wing spoilers popped up immediately, destroying the wing's lift, putting all the aircraft's weight on the wheels, maximizing brake effectiveness. Maximum brakes. Marcus commanded. He stood on the brake pedals with every ounce of strength in his legs. The 737 rolled down the abandoned runway, shaking and rattling. The brakes screamed, a high-pitched shrieking sound. Smoke poured from all the wheels as the brake pads heated to incredible temperatures. The entire aircraft shuddered violently with the force of maximum deceleration. 2,000 feet of runway used. 5,200 feet remaining. 3,000 feet used. 4,200 feet remaining. The aircraft was slowing but still moving dangerously fast. 4,000 feet used. 3,200 feet remaining. The trees at the far end of the runway were getting closer. Closer. 5,000 feet used. 2,200 feet remaining. Come on, come on, come on, Marcus whispered through gritted teeth. 6,000 feet used. 1,200 feet remaining. The aircraft was slowing more rapidly now as the speed decreased and the brakes became more effective. 6,500 feet used. 700 feet remaining. Still moving, still rolling, but slower now. 7,000 feet used. 200 feet remaining. 100 feet remaining. And then, with exactly 180 feet of runway left, the Boeing 737 stopped completely. Total silence in the cockpit. Then, from the cabin behind them, an eruption of sound, screaming, crying, praying, cheering, all mixed together in a cacophony of raw emotion and relief. Marcus sat frozen in his seat, hands still gripping the yoke so tightly his knuckles were white, breathing hard, heart pounding. David's hands were shaking violently. Tears were streaming down his face. We're down. We're on the ground. We're alive. Oh my God, we're alive. Elena unbuckled from the jump seat and stood. Excellent landing, gentlemen, textbook execution. Marcus turned to look at her. His voice was shaking. You just landed a commercial jet carrying 183 people on an abandoned military airstrip using A-10 combat gliding techniques and mountain wave soaring. Who the hell are you really? Elena smiled slightly, a tired, relieved smile. Just a retired pilot who had some relevant experience, Captain. No, Marcus said firmly, finding his voice. No. I would have killed everyone on this aircraft. We would have crashed in the forest 10 miles from Portland. Everyone would have died. You saved us. You saved 183 people. You're a hero. The cockpit door burst open. The head flight attendant rushed in, her face streaked with tears. Captain. Is everyone, can we? We're safe, Marcus said, his voice stronger now. Everyone's safe. Begin emergency evacuation procedures. Get everyone off the aircraft using the slides. The flight attendant nodded rapidly and ran back to the cabin. David was on the radio. Mayday, 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 Southwest 1847 is safely on the ground at Cascade Lock's abandoned airstrip. All souls safe, repeat, all 183 souls safe. We need immediate emergency services, medical support, and ground transportation for passenger evacuation. Outside, they could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching. The F-15s were circling overhead at altitude. Reaper's voice came over the radio, thick with emotion. Welcome to Oregon, Shadowhawk. That was the single most incredible piece of flying I have ever witnessed in 25 years of military aviation. You just saved 183 lives using skills and techniques I didn't even know were possible. I am honored to have flown with you. Elena picked up the radio handset. Her own voice was shaking slightly now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. Thanks, Reaper. Just another day at the office. But her hands were trembling as she said it. The reality of what had just happened was hitting her. She had saved 183 people. Using the skills that the Air Force had forced her to abandon 3 years ago. The helicopters landed within 15 minutes. Oregon State Police, Emergency Medical Services. FBI counterterrorism units, because any incident involving a commercial aircraft with 183 people aboard requires immediate federal investigation. NTSB investigators arrived by helicopter within 90 minutes, bringing specialized equipment. The passengers were evacuated using the emergency slides. A few minor injuries from the firm landing, bumps, bruises, one sprained wrist, nothing serious. No fatalities. No critical injuries. Buses arrived within 2 hours to transport passengers to Portland, where Southwest would arrange hotels and onward travel. But the investigators stayed. They immediately began examining the engines using borescope cameras. What they found was shocking and horrifying. Both engines were completely, utterly destroyed. The turbine blades were coated with a thick layer of melted volcanic ash that had solidified into a glass-like substance. The compressors were choked with deposits. The combustion chambers were scarred and pitted. Total failure. Complete destruction. These engines would never run again. They would have to be scrapped entirely. These engines never had any chance of restarting, one investigator said grimly. Once they ingested this concentration of ash, they were dead within seconds. The pilots did everything correctly. The engines were just gone. But then the atmospheric analysis came back from the environmental science team. The results made everyone stop and stare. The volcanic ash concentration in the air samples was 400% higher than a natural volcanic eruption would produce at this distance from the source volcano. And chemical analysis revealed something deeply disturbing: artificial dispersal agents. Synthetic chemical compounds specifically designed to keep ash particles suspended in the air for extended periods and prevent them from settling naturally. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was deliberate. Someone had intentionally seeded the ash cloud to make it more dangerous and longer lasting. The FBI was immediately given lead authority on the investigation. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez arrived from the Portland field office. She took one look at the chemical analysis and her face went hard. This is terrorism. Intentional. Someone deliberately tried to bring down this aircraft. Within 24 hours, FBI cyber teams had identified the source by tracing drone flight records and purchasing patterns for the chemical compounds. An eco-terrorist group called Sky Shield. The FBI raided their compound in rural Oregon and arrested 7 members. In the compound, agents found high-altitude drones modified to carry chemical dispersal tanks, barrels of volcanic ash collected from Mount Hood, synthetic dispersal compounds, detailed flight path data for commercial airlines, a manifesto explaining their ideology. The manifesto was chilling. Aviation is killing our planet. Every single flight burns fossil fuels and pumps carbon into the atmosphere. Air travel produces 2.5% of global carbon emissions, more than most countries. The aviation industry claims it's safe, claims it's necessary, claims we need it for modern life. We will prove them wrong. We will ground all flights. We will force the world to see that aviation is too dangerous to continue. We will release volcanic ash into commercial flight paths. Weather radar cannot detect it. Pilots will fly into it unknowingly. Engines will fail. Planes will be forced to make emergency landings. And the world will finally understand, aviation is destroying the planet. We do not seek to harm anyone. Modern aircraft have multiple safety systems. Pilots are trained for engine failures. They will land safely at alternate airports. But air travel will be disrupted. Flights will be grounded. Airlines will lose billions. And humanity will be forced to find alternatives. The planet is dying. We must act. We must prove that the sky belongs to nature, not to machines. During interrogation, the Sky Shield leader, a 34-year-old environmental activist named Thomas Brennan, broke down completely when shown photos of the 183 passengers who nearly died. "We didn't want to hurt anyone," he sobbed, his hands shaking. "We just wanted to stop the flights. We wanted to prove that aviation is too dangerous. We thought the planes would detect the ash on radar and divert safely. We didn't know, we didn't understand that volcanic ash is invisible to radar. We didn't understand that it destroys engines in seconds, not minutes. We thought they'd have time to land safely. We never meant for anyone to die. Oh God, we almost killed 183 people. 23 children. What have we done?" Special Agent Rodriguez looked at him coldly. "You almost murdered 183 innocent people. Including 23 children. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." The charges filed. 183 counts of attempted murder, terrorism, destruction of property, conspiracy to commit terrorism, federal aviation violations. All 7 Sky Shield members were denied bail and held pending trial. The news spread worldwide within hours. Headlines across every major news outlet. ECO terrorists nearly down commercial airliner with volcanic ash. 183 passengers saved by retired combat pilot. Quiet woman in row 8 was legendary military aviator. Shadowhawk, the hero nobody knew was aboard. And the question everyone wanted answered, who was Elena Vasquez? Why had she left the military? What was her story? The media dug deep. And they found the truth. The press conference was held 3 days later at a hotel conference room in Portland. The room was packed. Every major news network. Print journalists. Online media. The story was too big, too compelling, too dramatic to ignore. Elena sat at a table between Captain Marcus Webb and First Officer David Park. She looked deeply uncomfortable in front of the cameras and microphones. She was still wearing jeans and a simple shirt. She had refused the Southwest Airlines public relations team's offers of professional styling. A reporter from CNN stood up. "Captain Vasquez, you've been described as a legendary military pilot, but you've been retired from the Air Force for 3 years. Our research shows you were forced out. Can you tell us what happened?" Elena's jaw tightened. She had known this question would come. Had prepared for it mentally. But it still hurt. "I was disgraced," she said quietly, her voice steady but the pain evident. "Quietly forced out, given a choice between forced retirement with an honorable discharge, or court-martial for insubordination. There was a friendly fire incident in Afghanistan. I refused a direct order that would have resulted in civilian casualties. My commanding officers wanted the incident classified and buried. They wanted me to stay silent. I refused to participate in the cover-up. So I became a problem that needed to disappear." The room went absolutely silent. Every reporter was recording. This was explosive. "For 3 years," Elena continued, "I've been a disgraced pilot. Nobody would hire me. Airlines saw forced retirement on my record and asked questions I couldn't answer because it's classified. Flight schools wouldn't touch me. I worked at a hardware store. I delivered packages. I did temp work. All because I refused to kill children." A reporter from the New York Times, "Can you provide details about the incident?" Elena took a breath. "I was flying close air support for Army ground troops in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Taliban fighters were using a village compound as a base of operations. My orders were to destroy the building using my 30mm cannon and Maverick missiles. Standard procedure is to do a visual confirmation pass before engaging. I did that pass and observed civilians inside the compound, women and children sheltering from the fighting. At least 8 people. Maybe more. I reported this to my command and requested new orders or permission to find an alternative approach. I was told to engage the original target anyway. Exact quote, acceptable collateral damage. I refused. I told them I would not kill children. I found a different approach. I disabled their vehicles and called in ground troops to clear the building. It worked. The Taliban fighters were captured. Nobody died. But I had disobeyed a direct order. That made me a problem." The reporters were scribbling frantically. "Do you regret that decision?" someone asked. "No. Absolutely not. I would make exactly the same choice again without hesitation. You don't kill children to follow orders. That's not what we're supposed to stand for." Another reporter, "How many combat missions did you fly?" 127 confirmed. Close air support in Iraq and Afghanistan. 10 Warthog aircraft. Is it true you made a dead-stick landing with no engine power, in a combat zone? Elena nodded. Fallujah, Iraq. 2006, I was supporting Marines in urban combat operations. My aircraft took ground fire from an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade. Both engines were destroyed. I lost all power at approximately 800 feet altitude. I glided to an emergency airstrip outside the city and landed with no engines, severely damaged hydraulics, and minimal flight control. That emergency landing technique, energy management, using terrain, calculating glide path precisely, is what I used 3 days ago on the 737. You earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. Can you tell us about that? It's classified. I'm not permitted to discuss the specific mission. But you can confirm you received it? Yes. A reporter from the Washington Post, "Captain Vasquez, when you boarded Southwest Flight 1847, did you have any indication there would be an emergency?" No. None. Then why were you reading military flight manuals? I always read them when I fly. It's habit from 18 years of military service. I like to stay current on emergency procedures even though I no longer fly operationally. What went through your mind when both engines failed? Elena was quiet for a moment, remembering. Honestly? My first thought was, here we go again. Combat pilots develop a certain, calm acceptance of emergencies. You train so much for worst-case scenarios that when they actually happen, your training just takes over. Then I did the mathematics and realized the pilots were following standard procedure but wouldn't be able to reach Portland. I knew there had to be another option. Marcus Webb spoke up. Captain Vasquez saved every single person on that aircraft. I'd been flying for 31 years and I thought I knew everything about managing emergencies. But I had never trained for extended powerless flight. I had never learned mountain wave soaring techniques. I had never even considered that terrain could be used to extend glide range. Without her expertise, we would have crashed in the forest. Everyone would have died. She's a genuine hero. David Park nodded emphatically. She was calm, precise, professional. She knew exactly what to do at every moment. She gave us specific instructions and every single one of them was perfect. I owe her my life. A reporter looked at Elena. What do you want people to understand from this experience? Elena looked directly into the cameras. I want people to understand that doing the right thing sometimes costs you everything you value. 3 years ago, I was disgraced. Forced out of the career I loved because I refused to kill civilians. I lost the only job I had ever wanted since I was 8 years old and saw my first 10. I lost my purpose, my community, my identity. For 3 years, I've been nobody, working minimum wage jobs, trying to figure out who Elena Vasquez is when she's not a pilot. And then 3 days ago, I was on a routine flight. Just another passenger in row 8. Nobody noticed me. And the engines failed. And suddenly, all those skills that the Air Force tried to take away from me, all that training, all that combat experience, became the only thing that could save 183 people. So was it worth it? Being disgraced for doing the right thing? Losing everything? Yes. Every single time, because I can live with being disgraced. I could never live with knowing I killed innocent children just to follow orders. Sometimes the right thing to do is disobey orders. And sometimes the quietest person, the one nobody sees, is exactly the person who saves everyone. The room erupted in sustained applause. Many reporters were visibly emotional. The story dominated news cycles for weeks. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez stood on the tarmac at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, watching the sun rise over the desert. It was early morning. The sky was turning from deep purple to orange-pink. In front of her, a line of A-10 Warthog aircraft. The 74th Fighter Squadron, her old unit. She felt tears in her eyes. She had missed this so much. The sound of the engines, the smell of jet fuel and hot metal, the camaraderie of fellow pilots, the sense of purpose and mission. Footsteps behind her. She turned. Colonel Jake Reaper Martinez walked toward her in his flight suit, smiling broadly. "Hello, Shadowhawk." "Reaper." They shook hands firmly. Then embraced like the old friends they were. "I never thought I'd stand here again," Elena said quietly, looking at the aircraft. 3 years ago, I was disgraced. Forced out in shame. I thought I'd never wear the uniform again. Neither did anyone else. But things have changed. The whole world changed when you saved 183 lives. Reaper handed her an official folder with Air Force letterhead. "Read this." Elena opened it with trembling hands. It was an official order from the Secretary of the Air Force. Captain Elena Vasquez is hereby reinstated to active duty with full honors. Her previous forced retirement is expunged from all records and replaced with honorable service notation. The charges of insubordination are hereby dismissed and removed from her permanent record. She is awarded full back pay for the period of wrongful forced retirement. She is promoted to the rank of major with immediate effect. She is assigned to the Air Force Weapons School as Chief Instructor for Advanced Tactical Emergency Procedures. Furthermore, it is the finding of this review board that Captain Vasquez acted with extraordinary moral courage in refusing an unlawful order. Her actions upheld the highest standards of military conduct and the laws of armed conflict. She is a credit to the United States Air Force. Elena couldn't speak. She just stared at the words. How? She finally whispered. I was disgraced. Publicly forced out. Everyone in the military community knew it. How did this happen? Your actions on Southwest 1847 became international news. The media investigated everything, why you had been forced out, what really happened in Afghanistan, why a legendary combat pilot was working at a hardware store. When the truth came out, that you were disgraced and punished for refusing to kill civilians, there was massive public outrage. Congress launched an investigation. The Air Force was forced to review your case completely. The conclusion was unanimous: you were absolutely right and your commanding officers were absolutely wrong. They gave you an unlawful order. You refused it and were disgraced for doing the right thing. That disgrace is now erased. But I disobeyed. You disobeyed an unlawful order. There's a difference. The rules of engagement specifically prohibit targeting known civilian positions. Your commanders violated those rules and then tried to cover it up. When you exposed that, they disgraced you to protect themselves. But now everyone knows the truth. You're not a disgraced pilot anymore, Elena. You're vindicated. You're a hero. Elena felt tears streaming down her face now. There's more, Reaper continued. Your mountain wave gliding technique, the media has been calling it the Vasquez Protocol, is now being taught to commercial pilots worldwide. The FAA has made it part of the emergency training curriculum. You've literally changed how pilots think about powerless flight emergencies. We want you to teach it to military pilots too. Show the next generation how to fly when everything fails, how to use terrain, how to manage energy, how to survive the unsurvivable. You want me to be an instructor? We need you to be an instructor. We need pilots who know that sometimes the right thing to do is refuse an order when that order is wrong. That's not weakness. That's moral courage. That's true leadership. Elena looked at the A-10s lined up on the ramp. When do I start? Reaper grinned. Tomorrow morning. 0600 hours. If you're ready. Elena smiled, really smiled, for the first time in 3 years. I'm ready. Good. Welcome home, Major Vasquez. They walked toward the squadron building together. Behind them, an A-10 Warthog started its engines, that distinctive, powerful sound that Elena had missed every single day for 3 years. She was home. 5 years later. The Vasquez Protocol had become standard training for commercial and military pilots worldwide. The technique of using mountain wave lift and terrain features to extend glide range in emergency powerless flight situations had saved 6 more aircraft and over 700 lives in various incidents around the world. Southwest Flight 1847 became the most famous case study taught in every aviation school. Student pilots analyzed every decision, every calculation, every maneuver. Captain Marcus Webb retired after 33 years of flying. In his retirement speech at Southwest Airlines headquarters, he said, "I thought I knew everything about flying after 31 years. Then a quiet woman in row 8 taught me that sometimes the best pilots are the ones nobody notices until the moment they're desperately needed. She taught me that true expertise means being humble enough to accept help from unexpected sources. I owe her my life." First Officer David Park was promoted to captain. He never forgot the lesson Elena had taught him: trust your instincts and don't be afraid to ask for help, even from the most unexpected sources. The 7 Sky Shield terrorists were convicted after a trial that lasted 3 months. They received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years in federal prison. Environmental groups worldwide condemned their actions and emphasized that legitimate environmental activism never involves violence or terrorism. New protocols were implemented for detecting volcanic ash in flight paths. Commercial aircraft were equipped with improved sensors. Weather services enhanced their monitoring systems. And Elena Vasquez? She became one of the most respected instructor pilots in the United States Air Force. She taught at the Air Force Weapons School for 12 years before retiring again, this time on her own terms, with full honors and a chest full of medals. She gave lectures at aviation conferences worldwide. She advised aircraft manufacturers on emergency systems design. She consulted with airlines on pilot training programs. She wrote a best-selling book called When Everything Fails, Decision-Making Under Extreme Pressure, that became required reading at the Air Force Academy and was translated into 23 languages. But she was always most comfortable in the cockpit of an A-10 Warthog, teaching young pilots how to survive when everything goes wrong. Flying is about more than following procedures and checklists, she would tell her students on their first day. It's about adapting to circumstances you never anticipated. It's about improvising when your plan fails. It's about using every resource available, terrain, wind, physics, your own training and instincts. And sometimes, it's about having the moral courage to disobey orders when you know in your gut that those orders are wrong. That's what separates good pilots from great ones. Not technical skill, moral courage. On the wall of her office at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, she kept a large framed photograph. Southwest Flight 1847 on the ground at Cascade Locks, cracked concrete runway. Passengers evacuating down emergency slides, many of them crying with relief. Smoke rising from the overheated brakes. F-15 Eagles circling overhead in formation. Under the photograph, a brass plaque engraved with simple words. 183 souls saved. Row 8, see they call sign Shadowhawk. Sometimes the quietest person is exactly who you need. She would look at that photograph sometimes, especially on difficult days, and remember. Remember being forced out of the career she loved for doing the right thing. Remember sitting quietly in row 8, just another passenger, nobody noticing her, nobody knowing who she was. Remember the sickening feeling when both engines died and the aircraft became a glider. Remember making the decision to step forward when every regulation said she should stay in her seat. Remember proving that sometimes the right thing to do is break the rules. And remember that 3 years of exile and struggle had all been worth it for that one moment when her skills, the skills the Air Force tried to take away, became the only thing standing between 183 people and certain death. On the 10th anniversary of the incident, Southwest Airlines held a reunion. All 183 passengers who had been aboard Flight 1847 were invited. Nearly 140 attended. They gathered at a hotel in Portland. There were tears and hugs and stories. Marcus and David were there, both now retired. Elena was there, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. One by one, passengers came up to her. A woman with her teenage daughter, this is Sophia. She was 7 when you saved us. She's in college now studying aerospace engineering because of you. An elderly man, I got to meet my first grandchild because of you. Thank you. A businessman, I was sitting next to you in 8B. I never even looked up from my laptop. I had no idea who you were. I think about that all the time now, how we ignore the most important people around us. A young boy approached shyly. He had been 4 years old on the flight. Now he was 14. Captain Vasquez. I made you something. He handed her a model aircraft. A perfectly detailed A-10 Warthog, carefully painted, with Shadowhawk written on the side. Elena's eyes filled with tears. This is beautiful. Thank you. You're my hero, the boy said simply. At the end of the evening, they unveiled a memorial plaque that would be permanently installed at Cascade Locks Airstrip. The plaque read, on this airstrip, February 6, 2025 Southwest Flight 1847 landed safely after dual-engine failure. 183 souls saved through courage, skill, and leadership. Sometimes the quiet ones are exactly who we need. Elena stood looking at the plaque for a long time. Reaper, who had flown in for the ceremony, stood beside her. "You changed aviation history," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Elena shook her head. "I just did what I was trained to do." "No. You did what you were trained to do and had the moral courage to do it even after the institution that trained you had cast you aside. That's what makes you special. That's what makes you Shadowhawk." Elena smiled. "I was just the quiet woman in row 8. "Exactly," Reaper said. "You were exactly who we needed, exactly when we needed you. And you were there because 3 years earlier, you chose to do the right thing even though it cost you everything. That's not luck. That's character." They stood together in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains that had provided the lift to save 183 lives 10 years earlier. Shadowhawk had been quiet in row 8. Until the sky needed a legend. And then she had shown the world what true courage looks like.